spooky season time. Okay, so time for Momonosuke Part 4. Which is going to be Momonosuke Onigashima Part 1. Because, like with Kaido, there's a lot that happens for Momonosuke during Onigashima, so it's going to get broken into 2 parts. Okay. So, if I remember correctly, when last we left Momonosuke, he'd been captured by Kanjuro and had been being carried away by Kanjuro on the Ink Crane, Heron, whatever it was, to take Momonosuke to Onigashima. And Momonosuke had shouted down at the Straw Hats and the Scabbards and the rest of their allies to say, don't worry about me, essentially. Go ahead, focus on the raid, do that, I'll be fine. You know, I'll take care of myself. I'll manage alone. And we have, like, you know, the Scabbards are proud of him, and Luffy and the others and the Straw Hats and such are proud of him. I think Law is even a little bit proud of him because he's been around Momonosuke a good bit as well. Kid's just off of the corner going like, who the F is this kid? Who the heck is that brat? So we have that. They're on their way there. Once Kanjuro and Momonosuke reach Onigashima, they end up kind of taking like a back way in because Kanjuro can't just walk through the front door because he's still considered one of the Scabbards, so they take like a back way in through like the tunnels or whatever. How Kanjuro knows his way through the tunnels is beyond me, but he does. And they come across some of Kaido's men. They deal with them pretty easily, or Kanjuro deals with them pretty easily because they of course don't know that Kanjuro is one of their allies. And at some point in time during this time frame, Momonosuke gets his hands on a knife. And a little bit later, he attempts to cut Kanjuro's hand with it to try to escape. Good attempt. Doesn't work. Kanjuro then ends up just brutally beating Momonosuke to the point where Momonosuke just becomes unconscious. Kanjuro then carries Momonosuke the rest of the way to where essentially the banquet hall live stage area is, where Orochi is with Kaido. Black Maria is there also. And what ends up happening is Orochi's like, oh, good, Kanjuro, here you are. And Kanjuro just like chucks Momonosuke at them. For Black Maria's part, she at least looks somewhat concerned that there is a beaten up child in front of her. To be fair, later in this section, we will see her beating the F out of Sanji, so I don't know where her boundary lies for, it's not alright to beat up children. It is alright to beat up grown men who are defenseless at the time. It's like, sure, lady. To be fair, I kind of wanted Black Maria to show up in the cover page story and join Yamato. I don't know, maybe by the time this one's going up, the cover page story is probably finished. So I don't think that's going to happen. Yamato's probably back at home by now. Back at the Flower Capital by now. By the time this video goes up. But what ends up happening is, they chuck Momonosuke at, Kanjuro chucks Momonosuke at Orochi and Kaido. And Orochi's like, ah, yes, this is the Kozuki brat. And Kaido's like, are you sure? This is an 8-year-old child. And the last time I saw any of the members of the Kozuki family was 20 years ago. So this kid should not be this age. So he's like, yeah, Kaido doesn't quite believe it. To be fair, in Kaido's defense, not that I do that often, we have it that Kaido, he interacted with Momonosuke shortly just before everything happened with the castle burning and everything else like that. So he would probably but that was 20 years ago. So he's like, well, I guess the brat, kind of does look like Momonosuke, but I mean, that was 20 years ago. And I don't know how much Kaido buys into the time travel devil fruit aspect, but okay. And what ends up happening is, Orochi's like, no, this has to be him. And he ends up, Black Maria kind of just picks Momonosuke up and like puts him in her lap for a short bit, which is, I guess, nice. But eventually what ends up happening is Orochi essentially has Momonosuke like, chained up on like the, sideways crucifix that they have there. And has him, being shown off to all of the different to the performance floor of the Skull Dome, where all of like all the beast pirates are, and where Orochi's Oniwabanshu are and everything and such, and the Mimawari Gumi where they all are. As he's like, this is the Kozuki brat and everything else like that. And what ends up happening is Kaido is looking at, he's like looking at Momonosuke like, I guess this could be the kid, but let's give him essentially the same test that I gave him 20 years ago and see what he says, because as I went over in that video, the first Momonosuke video, from Momonosuke's perspective, all of this is happening in like 6 months, if that. From the time that the fire happened 20 years ago for him to this moment here is about 6 months. And when he, back before he got sent into the future, he was terrified during this moment. His father had just died, his home's on fire, all of this stuff. Fair. He is just wanting his mother. He just wants his parents. He's a child. And Kaido is expecting a similar answer. And he even says, like, if you do this, I'll give you, like, a full apology or whatever. I'll let you go. I kind of think Kaido would have actually done that. I think he would have done that. To give credit to Kaido. What ends up happening here, though, is not what Kaido expects. Momonosuke summons up his courage, which is a lot at this point in time. He just summons up his courage, is like, no, I am Kozuki Momonosuke. I am the son of Kozuki Oden, and I am the rightful shogun of Wano, is essentially like what he shouts out. And I am, we are here to defeat you. And at this point in time, like by the time this is happening, like a bunch of, I think Robin and Jinbei have like made their way in, and like, they're in disguise as beast pirates, and others are causing problems and stuff like that. The raid on Onigashima has technically began, just the all-out battles have not begun yet. Luffy and Zoro are causing trouble. And so we have this moment. And Momonosuke is, like, still handcuffed, is still, like, chained to this, crucifix, essentially. Face all beaten and bruised and everything. And, like, no, I am Kozuki Momonosuke. I am the son of Oden Kozuki. I am the rightful ruler of Wano. And Kaido is just like, okay. Also at this point in time, Kaido has also like just executed Orochi because like he's announced the new Onigashima project, and then Orochi, which must have been somewhat cathartic for Momonosuke, given every freaking horrible thing that this snake with hair has done to his family and to his country. There might have been a little bit of satisfaction from Momonosuke there. I wouldn't blame him at all. But so that's happened just before this moment. It was like, I love the fact that this also just adds to how brave Momonosuke is. He just watched Orochi get decapitated by Kaido, and then Kaido looks at him and says like, okay, what's your answer? And the kid goes like, yep, nope, I'm gonna be brave, and does that. That just makes it better. Kaido is then getting ready to try to execute Momonosuke. Thankfully, that's when the scabbards burst in and they start attacking Kaido, and everything else is going on there. During that time, Shinobu has managed to, using her invisibility skills as a ninja, sneak her way up onto the crucifix essentially, and is like slowly trying to like rot away the chains that are around Momonosuke. These are clearly not Sea Prism Stone chains, because then her ability wouldn't work on them. But she's slowly like rotting through the chains so she can try to get to Momonosuke. King unfortunately notices her, grabs her, and just hurls her away. Thankfully, she manages to save herself, Sanji is there. He manages to grab Momonosuke, get him off of there, well, in his, raid, in his stealth black raid suit, grabs Momonosuke, and clashes with King in midair. Sanji throws Momonosuke towards Shinobu, who just immediately catches him and flies off, taking Momonosuke with her. What ends up happening from there is Momonosuke and Shinobu land, and then they start essentially trying to find a way to make their way out of Onigashima. That is now their intention, is to try to find a way to get out of Onigashima, or at least find a safe place to hide for a while. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, from their perspective, they run into Yamato, who is identifying himself as Odin, and is like, come on, son, come to daddy. And I'm like, I love you, Yamato, but please don't. Read the room. Read the reaction of the small 8-year-old child. And, like, Yamato is then essentially kind of, like, chasing Momonosuke and Shinobu around at this point in time as they're trying to run away from him. Eventually, like, Luffy says something of, like, oh, don't worry, he's an ally, but they're like, he's crazy, and they keep running. Eventually, they end up running into Sasaki's platoon, where they are going to be attacked by Sasaki, and Yamato steps in and protects them. Like, takes the hits from Sasaki and everything else like that. And Momonosuke is just like, why are you helping us? And, Yamato reaffirms his commitment to protecting them and reintroduces himself as Yamato as opposed to as Kozuki Odin. And so we get that. At that point in time, Frankie and the Battle Frankie General Frankie shows up and ends up fighting against, these got Hacha chasing after him, one of the numbers. They're running through, they cause some problems, which allows Yamato the opportunity to escape with Momonosuke and Shinobu, and they run away. Eventually, they do end up getting out of the Skull Dome, but because their intention is to try to get to one of the boats and try to sail away from the Skull Dome, so that way, sail away from Onigashima, so they'll be at least semi-safer. That's their intention. Doesn't work, because Kaido has already, essentially, like, wrapped his island clouds around Onigashima and has lifted it up and is slowly moving it toward the mainland Wano and toward the flower capital. So they're like, oh, well, that's not gonna work. Okay. Also, like, the Scabbards burned all of their boats when they got their Scabbards in the Alliance for the most part. Except for, like, the Straw Hats and their boats and stuff like that. They all burned their boats because their intention was like, yeah, no, we're not leaving. If either we're leaving this island in victory or in death trying to defeat Kaido. That type of a thing is like the commitment that the Scabbards and the other samurai are showing to this. They did not burn the Sunny or the Victoria Punk or the Polar Tang or any of the other ships that are, like, specifically part of a crew or something like that. But they can't get to any of the ships anyway or any of the boats anyway because the island is no longer at sea level. It's like, oh, Yamato's like, oh, that's not good. Okay, new plan. And they end up running around, and eventually they end up hiding in one of the storerooms inside of the Skull Dome. While there, Yamato, or Momonosuke kind of asks about, like, the giant discarded dragon in the room, and Yamato's, oh yeah, that, Pork Kisti Ace, who's Luffy's older brother, actually was on Onigashima, about, 3 years ago, or whatever it was, 4 years ago, and, punched it. Tried to kill Kaido. Kaido wasn't here. He punched the dragon instead. He punched the giant dragon instead. And Momonosuke is like, okay. And, like, this is where Yamato explains about the meeting between himself and Ace and everything else like that and how they became friends. And then, Momonosuke and Shinobu are finding out that Yamato is Kaido's son. But they're like, okay, but you've been helping us. And he's like, yeah, no, I don't like my dad. I'm wanting to help you guys because, like, I idolize Kozuki Odin and everything else like that. And we get, like, that explanation there. And they're like, okay, fair. So they find out that Luffy's brother was Roger's son, and Yamato's, Momonosuke is like, oh yeah, Momonosuke has, like, vague memories of Roger. So we have that. At that point in time, Yamato pulls out Odin's journal and gives it to Momonosuke. And he's like, he says, Luffy coming to Wano must have been an act of fate, as he has the initial D. For, the will of D and everything else like that. And so Yamato gives Momonosuke his father's journal. It's just like, this was probably meant to be yours eventually anyway, and I've been keeping it safe for the past 20 years, and now I'm returning it to you. And so we have that. And he's, Momonosuke just sits there and starts, like, reading through the journal. And he's, like, learning a bunch of stuff. And, like, we have Shinobu, like, looking over his shoulder, but, like, peeking through her eyes because she's like, oh, I shouldn't read this. And so, like, he's reading through that and everything else like that. And he's, like, tearing up from reading through it because it's been so long since he's heard anything like this. And Yamato is, like, explaining more about his relationship, his friendship with Ace and everything. Like, they're listening. Unfortunately, they end up catching, a little bit later, we cut back to them, and they have caught one of the the little, security mice things, that roam around Onigashima and that essentially, like, transmit back to certain humans. It's probably just, like, Queen's technology that allows them to do this, because Queen is a scientist and probably was just like, Kaido's like, hey, can you make us something for, like, security? Queen, yeah, give me, like, 2 minutes. Yeah, give me a couple of days. And he comes up with, like, the Marys type of a thing, and, like, the weird eye pattern and stuff like that. So they have that. Yamato explains that the Marys are the surveillance system and that now their position has been compromised. They also hear the mouse is, like, broadcasting a message about some of the stuff that's going on. At this point in time, that's when a group of beast pirates show up to try to break into the storeroom, and Yamato and Momonosuke, Yamato, and Shinobu have to escape. So what happens is Yamato puts Momonosuke inside of his clothes, because he's big enough that Momonosuke will fit inside the clothing and not be noticed. And they start, and then Yamato and Shinobu, like, fight their way out of the storeroom, fight their way through the beast pirates that are there as they're running around, and end up moving, running around, and, eventually Yamato asks Momonosuke how he's doing, and he just feels disgusted with himself because everyone thinks so highly of him, but all he sees himself as is weak and foolish. And this is, like, when he changes into his, his little dragon form at that point in time. And Yamato's like, an eel? Wait a second. No, wait. You're, like, my dad. You're changing into a dragon like my dad. And, that's, like, when the Marys, catch them that, this is what's going on here. Momonosuke is, like, hiding in Yamato's clothes type of a thing. And Momonosuke is just, he's very upset because he views himself as, like, weak and foolish. I'm like, kid, physically weak you may be at the moment. You are 8 freaking years old. And while you have been training, which is admirable, you are still a child trying to deal in an adult war situation. So, yeah, you're fine. You are not, however, foolish or cowardly. I know he doesn't quite think that he's cowardly, but that's kind of implied. You stood up to Kaido, and you were trying to escape from Kanjuro and all of this stuff, and you have been trying to be as brave as possible. And you are coming into your own. which is a very admirable thing to be doing in this situation, kid. And I would say the same for any kid in this type of situation. So what ends up happening from there is eventually, Momonosuke calms down and he manages to change back to normal because he is getting better at controlling this ability. And he says that he used to change anytime he was surprised or sad when he first met Luffy's crew, but he's gained more control over it now. And he's like, oh, and Yamato's like, yeah, you're kind of similar to my dad in that regard. And Yamato's like, or Momonosuke's like, yeah, I wish I'd become a monster like Kaido. Then I would be a lot more useful in these situations. Oh, don't worry. You will. And what ends up happening from there is they eventually end up, they know that Luffy's up on the roof fighting Kaido and everything else like that. And Momonosuke is like sensing this. He's weakened, but he's still fighting and everything. And, so they end up, so this is Momonosuke's like observation hockey kind of kicking into gear and everything like that. Eventually they end up finding refuge in one of the crawl spaces, near the first floor. And eventually they end up making contact with Kinemon. And what ends up happening is Yamato is like, okay, I'm going to leave you two here, and I'm going to go off and do some more fighting. Now, all you have to do is just avoid the Marys, and you should be fine, and they shouldn't be able to find you. And what happens from there is, Yamato makes, like, the decoy Momonosuke, which I'm like, I love you, Yamato, but that's not going to fool anybody. And even Momonosuke and Shinobu are like looking at each other going like, I don't think that's going to work. But before leaving, Yamato asks again how Luffy was doing, and he's like, he's in the same state as before, but there's only two voices now, because like now it's just Luffy and Kaido on the roof at that point in time, as opposed to Luffy and the rest of the worst generation up there. So he's like, okay, well then I better hurry. And, that's when Momonosuke sits and begins reading the journal when it's just him and Shinobu for a little while. Unfortunately, there is a frog Mary that ends up finding them. And during this time frame, Momonosuke realizes as he's reading through his father's journal that he must not die. And he tells this to Shinobu. He's like, okay, I have to keep going. I cannot die because of what is in this journal. Now, we are, of course, as the audience, are not told exactly what is in the journal. Given what we saw during the Odin flashback, that's a good chunk of the stuff that's in the journal. But there's just additional things that's like answers to some of the questions of like what was on Laugh Tale. What was on the other road poneglyphs, different things like that. Other information that might give us clues about the hints to the Will of D or different things like that we just haven't been told yet. And Momonosuke doesn't end up telling Luffy either. And, what ends up happening is Momonosuke then just gets this sudden, overwhelming headache. And he's just, screaming and yelling, with as much pain that he's in. And, Shinobu is, like, very worried, and she's trying to do what she can to, like, soothe him. And what ends up happening is that this is lining up, I believe, for when Luffy has been knocked off of Onigashima by Kaido. And where he's falling, and where it's just like, Kaido has announced that, like, Luffy has fallen, Luffy is, Luffy lost, all of that stuff. And what ends up happening is that voice, the voice that Momonosuke is now hearing is Luffy's voice telling Momonosuke to tell everyone that he is still going to defeat Kaido. At this point in time, Kinemon and Kiku end up making their way into the crawl space. And what ends up happening is, at that point in time, Bao Wang has made this broadcast throughout all of Onigashima with the Marys, announcing that Luffy has been defeated, which that allows him to then find the Frog Mary. And, like, Kinemon and Kiku are, like, trying to, like, figure out why Momonosuke is having this horrible, horrible headache, why he's in so much pain and everything like that. And Momonosuke ends up, at some point in this time, he ends up grabbing the Frog Mary. The other, Shinobu saw the frog Mary, tried to warn the others about it, and Momonosuke ends up, Momonosuke tells Kanema that he has to give everybody a message from Luffy. And they're like, what are you talking about? At that point in time, that is when Kanjuro, in the disguise of Odin, climbs his way through into the crawl space. And Momonosuke just has this, oh my god, Dad, you're alive moment. And Shinobu is, of course, crying because, like, oh, Lord Odin, you're alive. And, like, Kinemon and Kiku are like, yeah, no, that's not Odin. That's not Lord Odin. That's not your father. No. But, like, just imagine from Momonosuke's perspective for this moment. And I think I've probably said this a couple of times already. But Momonosuke has been so terrified about having to take the throne, about having to take up this mantle that his father left behind him, this legacy, and, so worried about, like, what if I'm not strong enough to do this? What if I'm not brave enough? What if I'm not good enough? And he has, now pops up is what he assumes for a moment is his father, alive, back from the dead, perfectly healthy, and is here to be able to help fight and help defeat Kaido and hopefully turn the tide in the battle. Nope. Sorry, Momo. Not how that works. Unfortunately. And what ends up happening is, not how it's supposed to go. What ends up happening is, they explain that no, that's Kanjuro in a disguise and everything. And they're like, no. And Kiku tries to fight Kanjuro, ends up getting hurt in the process. Can't quite bring herself to finish him because he's, disguised as Odin. Kinemon steps up and takes Kanjuro out and everything else. At that point in time, Kaido bursts into the crawl space through the wall, which just, fair. Shinobu has grabbed Momonosuke and they are beginning to flee as Kinemon is gravely wounded by Kaido, trying to stand up to Kaido so that way Shinobu can try to escape with Momonosuke. From there, Momonosuke is like, okay, just had this very high, very bad low of possibly seeing his father again. Nope, it's the traitor. Now Kiku has been injured, Kanjuro has been defeated, and now Kaido is possibly going to kill Kinemon. So Momonosuke is not having a fun night. Not by a long shot. Nope. And they are trying to escape. And he is holding on to the frog Mary. He has managed to grab onto, at some point in all of this time, he's managed to grab the frog Mary. And Shinobu's like, why do you still have that? And he's like, I'm going to use this Mary to broadcast Luffy's message to the Alliance. And he states his aim and encourages everyone to continue fighting and everything else like that. He's also like talking into the Mary that is broadcasting around Onigashima and letting them know that no, Luffy may have fallen, but he's not defeated. He will be back. Keep fighting, keep going, all of that stuff. That's what Momonosuke is saying. And, we kind of, during this time frame, we, cut around Onigashima to see everybody's reactions to this. And they're like, yeah, of course he's not done. And Momonosuke is, satisfied with this. At this point in time, Kaido shows up and is trying to attack them because he's, dispatched Kinemon pretty easily, unfortunately. And he's getting ready to try to take out Momonosuke and Shinobu. Yeah, Shinobu uses her powers to rot away part of the ground, so they jump off / fall off Onigashima, where she then summons up her kite, and then she's holding on to Momonosuke, and they fly down to the mainland for safety. At that point in time, Yamato shows up, and Yamato starts fighting Kaido, so that's how Kaido is not able to chase after them. At that point in time, Momonosuke. Eventually, they end up landing on the coast of mainland Wano, and Momonosuke is just so upset about what's going on because since Kaido's there, he assumes that means that Kinemon and Kiku have been at the very least gravely injured, if not already are dead. So he's rightfully upset by that. And they kind of are like just hanging out on the coast for a little bit because they're like, okay, well, what are we going to do next? Eventually what ends up happening is the Polar Tang shows up at the Tokage port. The Heart Pirate submarine shows up there with Luffy. And Momonosuke is just so relieved that Luffy is okay, and like they're essentially doing like CPR on him to pump out all the water that was in Luffy. So, because he kind of almost drowned. I still say Law's crew should be much better. Your freaking captain is a doctor. If I was on a pirate crew and we had a doctor, I would be like, teach me basic first aid. Basic first aid, make sure that I know how to do CPR, make sure that I know how to do different things like this, because you may not be around all the time, and I need to know how to do these things just to be on the safe side, or at the very least so I can help. Throwing a bit of shade at the Heart Pirates, and I like the Heart Pirates. I like the Heart Pirates better than I like the Kid Pirates. And what ends up happening is, they've saved Luffy, and they're like, okay, what are we gonna do now? Luffy, is like, he's like come back to consciousness, but he's very weak. And, he needs food. That Caribou shows up. Caribou's just like, okay, well, I gotta do this to save my own skin. Gives him a bunch of food, and Luffy's like sitting there stuffing his face. First, what ends up happening is Luffy, and Momonosuke have a conversation where it's just like, okay, what are we gonna do next? And Luffy's like, well, you're going to turn into a dragon and you're going to fly me back up to Onigashima. And Momonosuke and Shinobu are like, what? What do you mean by that? I don't know what you mean by that. And what ends up happening is, Luffy needs to get back up there so that way he can defeat Kaido. He's like, I know that I can do this. I know that I can defeat Kaido. He's not wrong. And he's like, I need you to turn into a dragon. I need you to fly me up to Onigashima. And Momonosuke has, like, hit his resolve at this point in time. He's like, okay, I know what I need to do now. And, like, him and Shinobu kind of go off to have, like, a little private talk while Luffy's sitting there stuffing his face. And Momonosuke is looking at Shinobu, and he's just like, I need you to use your powers to age me up 20 years to make me physically 28 years old, so I will physically be the correct age that I need to be, so that way I can hopefully turn into a big dragon like Kaido, so that way I can help fight. So I can do what I need to, so I can get Luffy and the crew, so I can get Luffy and get him up to Onigashima, so I can at least help in this fight. And Shinobu is very hesitant to do this, as I went over in her video. She's very hesitant to do this because she can't reverse it. Unlike Bonnie's ability that is, like, temporary for, like, aging someone up or aging them down or doing, like, the distorted future or whatever. Not that Shinobu knows that devil fruit even exists, but it's not a temporary thing. It's like with Bonnie, she could just physically age Momonosuke up to 28 years old, and then he might be just fine for, like, however certain amount of time it would take, and then he'll age back down to his normal age. But that's not the way that Shinobu's fruit works. Hers is ripe. It permanently ages you up. She can't age you back down. And even if Bonnie was here, she could then temporarily age Momonosuke back down to being 8 years old, but it wouldn't be permanent, and he would physically then age back up to being 28 physically. And Shinobu was just like, but then you won't get to grow up normal. I can't reverse it. You'll be mentally 8 years old, mentally still a child inside of an adult body. And it's irreversible. I can't change you back. And Momonosuke is like, no, I understand that. I get that. But I have to do this. You have to age me up because I have to be able to fly Luffy back up there, and I have to be able to at least help fight in some way. Otherwise, what good am I right now? Is essentially like what happens here. Shinobu eventually gives in. She's like, okay. And she uses her ability to age Momonosuke up physically 20 years, so he becomes physically 28 years old. And that's where we're going to end this video, and you can guess right where we're going to be picking up the next one. And that the next one should be the last Momonosuke video, will be Onigashima Part 2, plus all of the stuff that happens, you know, at the end of the Wano arc, and any additional things that we have seen from Momonosuke since then. And then there will be the Hiyori videos after that. So that's what I have here. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!